Books to Read. I am Matt Hernandez, and today we're looking at this book here, Are What You Love by James K. A. Smith. I did not look at what his two middle initials are, so maybe from here on I should call him Professor Smith. He is a professor at Calvin College in Minnesota, and the only thing that I really looked him up in was a speech that he gave by the same title with a question and answer format at the end at the Veritas Forum, which he said was also at which he said is also in Minnesota. I'm not super familiar with Calvin College and some of those things, so I cannot comment on some of that. This would be my third time remaking this video because, well, the first time I think I might have said a sentence or two that I'm like, should I have said that? And then the second time, I think I came off a little bit too slow. So here I am the third time and wondering if my shirt's a bit too wrinkled, but the show must go on, I suppose. This book, Are What You Love, is about the the things we think we love, but what we actually love, what we say we love, but what do we love in actuality? And I think that so many of these concepts are so extremely important because we might have some innate feeling about what we say we love, but then what are we actually focusing our time on? Such as I am a little bit embarrassed to say, but before I came to edit this video, before I decided I should just redo it, was I was just kind of messing with my PS3. Nothing in particular that is so important, but I do have maybe a fixation on messing with my tech, which is very bad to do considering how narrow my time is with having two sons. So James K. Smith, Professor Smith, calls himself a philosopher foremost, but I wonder how he might critique me if I was to tell him about a few of my video making habits before even getting down to making this. Well, I do have a variety of pages that I'm going to show in this book. Now, when I watched his speech at the Veritas Forum, he stayed strictly within this concept of I guess a very secular setting, you know, trying to get people to think about what do they actually worship and just making people aware of such a concept. But when we look at this book, now the more times I've looked at this book to record and re-record this, I could see the transitions the author is making throughout the book from the beginning and as the book progresses. Because at first read, I did not see exactly what he was trying to do with that because he starts with this concept and he really goes into the shopping mall. Of course, he mentions Starbucks once or twice, which I should have included a screenshot of just for a good measure because the last book review video was about Starbucks, or in a sense about Starbucks, right? And then, he mentions maybe Xbox once or twice, but, just the religious feeling you have at the mall, and we may not be aware of it. And as you can see, these game controllers on my right, would that be your left? I think so. Just how I would show this and how it feels when we're about to get some of these things. Well, rather than having me go on what might turn into a tangent, let me show you some of the pages that really stuck out for me and how I can tell you why I really like this book. Here's a photo of the author, Professor Smith, and this is the same cover as you see me holding here. Okay, now as we jump into the book here on pages 8 and 9, as we look at the middle of the first large paragraph on page 8, as we see kind of defining what it is to be a human, it says this is significant for a couple recognizes that human beings are made by and for the Creator who is Christ. In other words, to be true and full human, we need to find ourselves in relationship to one who made us and for whom we were made. Gospel is the way we learn to be human. As Irenaeus once put it, the glory of God is a human being fully alive. Second, the implicit picture of being human is dynamic. Be human is to be something, directed to something, oriented towards something. I am not prepared to maybe give too much of my own speech on something like this, but I I do believe that this is quite true. If I believe that it is important for me to maybe make these book review videos and I let myself be easily distracted when I have narrow windows of time, it's 9 p.m. Both of my sons are asleep, but they might wake up at any moment. The older one might wake up. Then if he does, can I still continue making this video? But it would have been my own fault if I let myself be distracted before making this. So if if any whims of anything to distract me take hold and pull me towards something else, and I'm not being oriented toward God. And then when I look at the last page, I can get back into this where the author says, a bit quoting Alvin Plantinga, Professor Alvin Plantinga, is to say that it should be Christian something something, not something something which happens to be Christian. Well, when I get into my own opinion about part of that, I don't even think that maybe I'm respecting my own opinion of that. If I'm just letting the whims of maybe some or something online just and grab my attention rather than me, you know, finding myself in relationship with one who made me and for whom I was made. And if we can all put some attention into that. Hey, here. So on page 28 and 29, really getting into the thesis here. And for some of you, maybe you might prefer Professor Smith's speech at the Veritas Forum a little bit more than the book because he really gets into it here. But at times, I mean, having to read this quite a bit, I could see what he was from the middle of page 29. Many of us can identify if I ask you, a Christian, tell me what you really want, what you most deeply long for, ultimately love. Well, of course, you know the right answer. Know what you ought to say, and what you state could be entirely genuine and authentic, a true expression of your intellectual conviction. But would you want to step into the room? Are you confident that what you think you love aligns with your innermost longings? This, comments Dyer, is one of the lessons of the zone. Sometimes a man doesn't want to, what a man thinks he wants. Hey, so what we profess to love, care about, may not truly align with everything else of every other action. I mean, sometimes I might wonder with my son when he's calling me to play with him, and it's like, am I just still eating because I'm actually eating, or am I being a bit lazy and should I, expedite, rush, get up, stand up, and join him, play? So I do have to think a little bit about that, about these things in my own life, because what I might feel is that at times, sorry, is that when I'm at work, I'm thinking about coming home. When I'm at home, I'm thinking about going to work. And where are my thoughts actually? Okay, here, 36 and 37. So on the so on the bottom of page 36 or the last full paragraph, your love or desire aimed at a vision, at the good life that shapes how you see the world while also moving and motivating you, is operative on a largely unconscious level. Your love is a kind of automaticity. Gosh, so embarrassing. Just like even last time when I went to make this. That's why we need to be aware of how it is acquired. You know, I'm I'm not ready to give like a speech on this. I need to focus on this book and reasonably find context in myself in this book and how I can apply what it's saying to myself. But I do truly believe that if we do not know ourselves, do we have so much free will? And if we're moving too much on an unconscious level, then are we orienting ourselves in anything that we believe in, even if, it's a non believer of any kind of faith at all looking at this? Well, still, I mean, whatever you might say is whatever your highest values are, are we really doing that, following that, believing in that when we work in an unconscious level towards something else, which I think could be so vicious when it comes to so much advertising and that kind of thing, you know? Okay, the middle and only full paragraph on page 37, it starts with, now consider the implications of this for what you love. If you think of love shaping practices as liturgies, this means that you could be worshiping other gods without even knowing it. That is because such cultural liturgies are not just one off events that you unwittingly do. More significantly, they are formative practices that do something unconsciously but effectively to tuning your heart to the songs of Babylon rather than the songs of Zion. Now, he keeps throwing out this word liturgies out there. The more I read this book, I feel more comfortable using this word. But frankly, maybe I'm not so theologically sound as to use some of the I mean, I think this book was written for the layperson, but nevertheless, when he throws out a few words like this, it doesn't come out so naturally for me to try to say. But as best I gather, I do agree with this point that this is true. That the practices we do daily, they form a story. And the more I looked at it with this book, I really do resonate with this point because the central thesis of this point is is said by many, theologians, people who work somewhere in psychology, something like this, philosophers. But I also like the emphasis that Professor Smith has on story because one of my favorite books that one day I'll get to, The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker, he covers some of these concepts as well, that we are so gripped with a paranoia, a fear of death, that it controls us. It consumes us. And, we seek to worship or be worshiped. Now, the thesis of that book is not the same as this, but there are some overlapping ideas. But I don't know how much that book might have covered story. And we do see that here. Even the daily small stories we do has an impact, such as maybe if somebody says you're always on your phone, but you're not always on your phone, but maybe some emotional memory gets attached even much later on. Or maybe I'm going off a bit on tangent. Let's go to the next page. Look here, pages 40 and 41. Okay, so if we look here around the middle of oh, the bottom of page 40, this is when he first begins to mention the mall. One of my quiet moments of parental success was the day our oldest son, then a young teenager, asked me, Dad, can you drive me to the temple? I knew what he meant immediately. We had recently had a discussion in which I tried to impress upon him that the local mall is actually one of the most religious sites in town, but not because it is preaching a message or touting a doctrine. No, no one meets you at the door of the mall and gives you their statement of faith that lists the 16 things the mall believes. Well, we do see many statements, right? I mean, some of the malls here have some slogans, and plenty of the stores and there also have slogans and different catchphrases, stuff like that. And I do really appreciate his points with the mall. You guys wouldn't believe how many malls there are in the city that I am in now. And when I go around the mall, I've had to slowly condition my son, because condition the right word, we'll get him accustomed to him not getting a toy every single time we'll go to the mall or something like this. But I guess it's taken a bit of time. Goes to a toy store, runs around, and he wants these objects. But I guess I'll get back into that point in just a moment. Okay, also a little bit more on the right hand side. The mall is a religious site, not because it is theological, but because it is liturgical. Its spiritual significance and a threat isn't found in its ideas or its messages, but in its ritual. The mall doesn't care what you think, but it is very interested in what you love. Yeah, I do think they try to pull into what we love. I I agree. Okay, here on page 44 and 45. Now we see a picture of a mall. There are a few pictures in this book. I don't know. I mean, once I saw one picture, I just wanted like more pictures. I don't know why, but I almost like wanted even more pictures. But I mean, so often we probably read books with no pictures. Here on page 45, it is either case after time spent focusing on and searching in what the faithful call the racks with our newfound holy objects in hand, we proceed to the altar that is the consummation of worship, while acolytes and other worship assistants help us navigate our experience. Behind the altar is the priest who presides over the consummating transaction. It is this religious transaction of exchange and communion. Okay, he goes on for another sentence or four or five with this, but I also wanted to highlight how I have issues with this in my own life. You know, maybe you had seen I had a few of these, right? This is a Wii controller. Now, as I show these, I have many more than these. Now, perhaps the Wii and Wii U were just unfortunately made to have to use too many, but I mean, I also willingly choose to get even more of these than what is necessary to just sit down, play a game. In fact, I don't even play that much. I will just find time to tinker. Uh, And lastly, I have more, but I think this captures the point enough. And I have so many of these. And it's like, why? Why do I do this to myself? I don't know. I'm thinking about getting another one or two, maybe around Christmas or a bit after. So I certainly do agree that the premise here is true. And maybe oftentimes, I mean, in the middle of the page, maybe you can see it with newly minted relics, as it were, which are themselves the means to the good life embodied in the icons who invite us into this participatory moment in the first place. So we make our sacrifice, leave our donation. And when I see that, our sacrifice, for the past, what is it, like 2 months maybe? Maybe it hasn't even been that long. But I started listening to Dave Ramsey because I was listening to another Ramsey personality and I didn't even know what that connection was. And there does seem to be some sacrifice. Some people, they just buy things. And I'm obviously guilty of this too and getting better, but doesn't it almost feel like we are absent free will at times when we do these actions? When we feel this excitement in our chest that this object is going to make us a bit happier or somehow improve our lives, and instead it just stays in a drawer in the living room and never gets touched? Okay, so on this next page, so here we go with this word liturgy again, pages 52 and 53. On the only full paragraph on 52, by our immersion in this liturgy of consumption, we are being trained to both overvalue and undervalue things. We're being trained to invest them with a meaning and significance as objects of love and desire, in which we place disproportionate hopes. Yeah, I think this is true. Just as I had said, and in a sense, we do begin to undervalue things with the more things we get because then we don't use the other things we have. I mean, uh, getting caught up in some of this stuff years ago, I had bought a Sega Dreamcast, and I'd always liked retro gaming and that kind of thing. But I think I got caught up a bit in the YouTube stuff about it. Every year there's going to be videos that will say why you should have X in 2026, why you should have X in 2027. But by getting this, I didn't use the other things that I had, or have. And if you look on the right hand side, it does mention the mall again. Page 53, around the bottom, the mall's liturgy fosters habit and practices that are unjust. So it does everything it can to prevent us from asking such questions. I suppose it's true, right? Don't think about it, don't ask, just assume product. Okay, here. So, pages 78 to 79. Here, on page 79, in the first full paragraph, this is why those of us who inhabit postmodernity have so much to learn from ancient Christians, because the rituals and liturgies of their surrounding cultures were much more overt. For example, their civic political spaces were unabashedly temples, whereas our traffic under euphemisms, stadiums, capitals, universities. Now, I think this is so true. I mean, with events of the past, some of the US Capitol buildings, I mean like both state and federal, had been the Capitol buildings had been called cathedrals. And many have called universities something of a place of worship as well. Is that ironic because Professor Smith works at Calvin University or Calvin College? I don't know how much Christian university is like a place of worship also at the same time. I have never really been to a Christian university other than maybe just passing through. I don't know. But I do think that these things in the modern world take place of what in the past may have been a temple. And to think otherwise, we may or may not be lying to ourselves. And I'm sure there's some nuance there. I'm sure some people just go to a concert once a year, go to a stadium once a year. It's fun and you go home. But, but I hope I got my idea across though. Okay, next. Okay, so here on pages 84 and 85, on the around the top of page 85, at the beginning of the first full paragraph, to be conformed to the image of his Son is not only to think God's thoughts after him, but to desire what God desires. That requires a recalibration of our heart's habits and the recapturing of our imagination, which happens when God's word becomes the orienting center of our social imaginary, shaping our perception of things before we even think about them. So, like the secular liturgies of the mall or stadium or the frat house, Christian liturgies can't just target the intellect, but they also target the body. Okay, yeah, I mean, I uh, I fully agree, but I think what made me initially screenshot this page to discuss was also to say how the book takes a turn from where it had started from to now. Whereas maybe if you watch some of Professor Smith's other speeches, maybe by the same title of this book, the book does this transition, which is probably good because I have grown to not always like when a problem is pointed out, but there's no clear solution. So now he's beginning to tell us the solution. We've acknowledged the problems, the mall. We've acknowledged that there's a subconscious habits in us, and what we're valuing, overvaluing, or undervaluing. So he's trying to reorient us towards what our focus should actually be at this point. Okay, here. So the point of story, page 92 and 93. On page 92, at the bottom, you see a picture. You see a picture of two boys being told a story. Then here on page 93, it says on the top, in a similar way, Christian worship should tell us a story that makes us want to set sail for the immense sea that is the triune God, birthing in us a longing for a better country, a heavenly one that is kingdom come, a biblical vision of shalom, of the world where the Lamb is our light. So, okay, then on the next paragraph, worship works as fiction does, both traffic and story and target the imagination. Thus, an axiom for novelists is also relevant for worship leaders. Show, don't tell. In a profound little book of literary criticism, how fiction works. So, when I first took this screenshot, I didn't see what the author was doing. I just liked the point of story. Now, though I may not only review literature, or I mean fiction, because by a sense this book may meet many people's definition of literature. But at second reading, I had seen that the author throughout the book was discussing story. He has been discussing story. Our daily habits tell a story. There's a liturgy there. What story could those be telling us? So that is a point that I'd sort of missed at first. And it also is quite essential because, I mean, for instance, I profess my faith to my family. They see me looking at Christian content online. This is my third time trying to make this video, but do I maybe pray enough as a family? Do we do some of those activities together at times? And some of those stories will also matter later on as, father and having kids and stuff, you know? Okay, here, this concept of confession. So on the right hand side, page 100, also look here, page 102. Page 102 also, if you look on the middle of the first large paragraph, Protestant excarnation has been ceded its business to others. If you're looking for a message, an inspirational idea, some top up fuel for your intellectual reciprocal, well, there are entire cultural industries happy to provide that. Why would you need church? You could watch Ellen or Oprah or a TED Talk. Yeah. And the author discusses tradition as he said the how the ancient Christians were. And I mean, growing up where I did, there wasn't always a very large sense of tradition. And now I can't say what tradition I might fall into because I've lived overseas for so long. And it's not like this is the most Christian country. It's not like I'm going to post this video on Billy or Yoku or whatever other Red Notes or something like that. Yeah, yeah. But now I do consider those things more. Hey, here on 103, the gift of confession. Let me highlight one example, the practice of confession and assurance of pardon. But this chapter in the narrative arc of Christian worship. So, if we jump down to the bottom a bit, to the second to last paragraph or the last full paragraph, but in order for the church to be that sort of place, it was going to have to feel less, well, churchy. It was going to have to be sensitive to seekers. The church would have to remove those aspects in its practice and tradition that were alleged to be obstacles to the unchurched. It had to be accessible and cool. Now, I do think that maybe a lot of large churches, that they seek to do this. They seek to be cool and welcoming. And I'm maybe it's a bit of a pejorative. It's not my intent. I'm not naming the church or anything. But when I lived in San Diego, there was one, I guess you could say it was a mega church. Some people had I guess it's a pejorative to say that it was kind of a beginner church because maybe it wasn't always the most theologically heavy in a sense. And maybe some people might have been looking for that. Maybe at my age, I don't know what I would be looking for. I'd be looking for something that's a good fit for the family, but it is something that has come to mind. But you see how the topic has kind of transitioned to this by now is also why I screenshotted this point. Okay, so here on page 106 and 107, still he's mentioning confession a bit, the poetics of confession. If we look here on page 107 at the top, the first full paragraph, the same thing is going on in worship today that was going on in ancient worship of the people of God, all the way back to Israel, which has been characterized by a certain poetics. If God meets us as liturgical animals who are creatures of habit, he also meets us as imaginative animals who are moved and affected by the aesthetic. Okay, so he's trying to pull us with these liturgies that happen from the beginning to now. So I do think at points Professor Smith is trying to strike a bit of a balance. He's not trying to disparage large churches that are welcoming to maybe many new believers, but he's also trying to point to some of the old liturgies and why they're still relevant today. There are moments that I wish that he might have named, but some of those things may have been specifically because I'm curious about it. But then again, maybe he would have gotten some lost in some details, and that might have taken away from the central thesis of the book. Hey, here. So, here on page 116 and 117, on page 116, and I fully agree with this point, the idolization of the family noted by Shimon results in an almost impossible pressure on the family to function as a closed, self sufficient, autonomous unit. As Shemin laments, it is not the lack of respect for the family, but the idolization of the family that breaks the modern family so easily, making divorce its almost natural shadow. It is the identification of marriage with happiness and the refusal to accept the cross in it. You know, I fully agree. I fully agree. And I don't think I always do a good enough job at putting Christ first in my marriage, you know? I mean, I've been Christian like most of my life and stuff, but I just do my daily simple life. And it's not like my wife and I might do little daily devotionals and stuff like that. At times I feel like I have worshipped my children, and that's certainly not right. And once your child turns 3 years old, as mine currently is, they kind of remind you that they can scream for attention in ways that might not make you bow down to them and worship the ground that they stand on. But but there are those moments, where you look at them with such an adoration, as if they are the faith you have in this world, stuff like that. And yeah, I do think this idolization of the family thing is very real. It's very real. Hey, here, page 136. So, this is like the only page that I actually screenshotted correctly. At the bottom of the page, it says the table at home is an echo of the Lord's table. The communion of the saints is given microcosmic expression in the simple discipline of daily dinner together. So, I think at my house, we need to do better at that sometimes. How we eat together, when we eat together, and that type of thing. You know, the way this apartment is partitioned, the middle section can be quite hot, and maybe eating in front of the television. Maybe we need to eat at the table even more. I mean, I'm recording this on September 28th, but I we should be eating at the table and spending that time together, creating that picture in our kids' minds. And sometimes it might be a bit difficult because I might get home a little bit too late from work and the family's already hungry. And I tell them, just eat without me, eat before I get home. But we do need to put these things into consideration. Okay, here. So on page 144 to 145, the more times I've tried to record this, the more I'm understanding what the author was getting at. But here where they're talking a bit about youth groups at churches. And now I'm beginning to see a bit more of the connections that the author was trying to make. Now, here on the middle of the first large paragraph on page 144, the cheery atmosphere that creates room for a hip, young teacher to emerge with either a broadly moralistic message, don't drink, don't smoke, and above all, don't have sex, or generally therapeutic message, we're just here to love on you, as if the gospel were one big hug. Okay, so then here on page 145, second, we have turned youth ministry into an almost entirely expressive affair, surmising that what will keep young people in the church is a series of opportunities for them to sincerely exhibit their faith. I mean, I cannot relate exactly to what he is going on about here, but I could relate quite a bit. I mean, if you look at the book, he throws around an Xbox once or twice in some of these examples. But when I was younger, I didn't always see the point of the youth group. I liked that I had some mentors there who I believe sincerely cared about me, and I wonder how they're doing sometimes. But for the teaching part and the hanging out with other people part, it never seemed all that interesting to me for a variety of reasons. I I would have preferred just to just have a mentor and have somebody to speak to, whatever I would have needed to have chatted about at that age, at being 13ish. Okay, here. So pages 178 to 179. Now, here on page 178, there's the subheading Tradition for Innovation. Then the paragraph starts. On the other hand, evangelicalism continues to be a hotbed of almost unfettered religious innovation, ever confident in its ability to compete in the shifting marketplace of contemporary spirituality. The entrepreneurial independence of evangelical spirituality, which is as old as the American colonies, leaves room for all kinds of congregational startups that need little, if any, institutional support, catering to more and more specialized niches. Okay, so at the beginning, I thought the author kind of supported this, but the more I look at this, he's stating what is, and there's a lot of good in this. But I also don't feel that he's the greatest fan of this either. Regardless if this goes on or not, he wants people to be aware of this. But we do seem like we have shifted from the original thesis of the book. And I guess as we see what it is that we worship, we might consider how we worship at the place of worship as well, right? So here on page 179, as it says on the second paragraph, but if our cultural work is to be restorative, it is going to put the world to rights. Then we need imaginations that have absorbed a vision for how things ought to be. Our innovation and invention and creativity will need to be bathed in eschatological vision. I apologize. Eschatological vision of what the world is made for and what it's called to be. So, you know, so still with as he says, restorative nature, we're not just trying to advance to just forward, but if we take a bit of time, we see, what has become versus what we had. And, you know, I could try to reconcile this idea and I see it and I see the idea is trying to make, but initially it did seem like a departure from the initial thesis of the book. Okay, here's the last screenshot. And so pages 186 and 187, perhaps the only two pages that screenshotted as I had hoped. So in the middle of this paragraph, it says on 186, we ought not to settle for being Christians who happen to be artists or lawyers or simply also Christians. We should see our vocations as ways to pursue God Himself. And as Plantinga puts it, to do so with integrity, independence, and Christian boldness. You know, I I don't know. Am I pushing back to think that for a lot of people it is okay to just be a something that happens to be Christian? I think there's a lot of good in that too. Or maybe with how a person identifies this concept in themselves, you know, maybe certain types of media would be better if people I don't know. I'm not an expert in any kind of media of novels or movies or something, but maybe at times that people sort of reoriented how they figure that they are both or the Christian first, but still, I don't know. I don't want to disparage anybody, but still try to make something quite artistic and stuff. Because sometimes I might watch a movie and it just seems very low budget and tacky, but you can find some low budget movies and the cinematography is still up to par. I believe I covered most of the main points of the book that I wanted to cover. And it did seem that regardless of how many times I'd gone over it, that unless I'd gotten very specific with a few points, that there is quite a bit to say in this book. It is a short read, but it will have the reader thinking quite a bit about what he's saying and how we can digest it and how we can apply it in our lives. I mean, the next book that I'm going to read, a Stephanie Plum novel, Forever 14. Maybe that book won't have so many places in it that I can really reflect back onto myself as I review the book. So this one did seem like it was going to be a long one regardless, and I can try to work on that in the future. For now, take it easy and have a wonderful day.